3, 2, 1.
You see, a few months prior, I got it in my head that a DIYer can do whatever they set their mind to. So with 3 parts enthusiasm and 1 part delusion, I put some support structure in place to make sure my roof stayed where it's supposed to, all the while wondering, have I ruined my house? And I think the only logical answer to that is an unequivocal yes. But then that's nothing new for my house. My front door was a sheet of plywood for a while there, in the middle of winter no less. I tried to preserve as much of the timber as I could. The majority of it was a native timber you just can't buy anymore. Trouble is, it was so old and hard, when you hit it with a hammer, it just laughed and told you to piss off. Since this corner piece was going to support the weight of the roof, I had to reinforce it to carry the weight. And since it's going to be a clean plastered corner, it also needs to look good, which isn't exactly my strong suit. In case it wasn't immediately obvious, I'm more of the demolition type. The base plate of the wall was aggravatingly well fastened, and since it was such a tight area, I had a hard time getting cutting tools in place. But with a bit more percussive persuasion, I was able to convince it to leave, begrudgingly. The other side of the wall got much the same treatment, and was far more courteous about its departure. That left just the top plate in place. Some might say the moment of truth. So after cutting it free on either side, I got to prying, and crossed my fingers I did everything right, because as funny as it might be, I'd really rather not have a total ceiling collapse. Now to figure out how to get a beam in there, because that is an absolute dog's breakfast. According to my plans, I need to fit 2 big ass beams next to each other, so I think a good place to start is to make some room. I used a string line to get a nice straight line, and then did my very best to suffocate under the weight of sawdust. Oh, and I forgot to cover any furniture. Yeah, the Minister of Interior wasn't too impressed. It's a lesson I never seemed to learn. The skill saw couldn't cut deep enough to get all the way through, so I finished off the cuts with a reciprocating saw. There were also some cables I needed to move, so I got on the roof and moved those while I was at it. That left a big enough gap to shove some wood in, which I was particularly excited about. Now you might think this is the point where you'd ask for some help. Big heavy beam, lifting above your head, but I, however, am far too stubborn for that. Told you I was excited about the wood. I didn't think 2 would fit quite so easily, but I was proven wrong, because the second one slotted into place without a fuss. Once I had them in position, I nailed them both together and used brackets to screw them into the walls. And with the beam in place, it was time to hang things from it, namely my ceiling, so I can finally get rid of the pink temporary walls. These metal brackets are called joist hangers, and they're going to connect my roof to the beam, ideally preventing it from falling down on me. Each one of the ceiling joists will get one of these attached to it, and the other side is screwed into the beam, and in theory, holding the ceiling up. The last thing to do before pulling down the temporary walls is to reinforce each end of the beam, which sounded really easy when my builder friend explained it. Actually doing it, however, not so much. So after cutting out some packers to make space, I got the replacement piece cut to length and slotted into place, completely missing the sneaky bolt hidden down there. Ah, found it after all.
Sorry, hold on, Jim just came out the other side when you kicked it.
Which highlights beautifully the other issue.
That means that was all bowed.
Note to self, always check for straightness of timber. After some University of YouTube research, I pinned the bottom and top in place and clamped in the offending beam, only to discover that it twisted the whole assembly. However, my persuading bar took care of that issue, and I used some big blue screws to lock it all into place. And in case you were wondering how hard this timber is, here's an example of it telling me to bugger off. It's about 100 kilo. So instead of removing it the standard way, I chopped it off. The plans called for using these things called handy brackets. Essentially, they're enormous bolts that stop anything going anywhere. Shame it doesn't work on teenagers though, although technically they are tie-down brackets. I put one of those on each side of the span and bolted each side to the concrete floor. Then realised, how am I supposed to fit wood in there? There's some dirty grey bolts sticking out now. So after a bit of strategic chiselling, I made the bottom of the wood into a matching Lego piece, and it clipped right into place. So to whoever distracted the fuck-up fairy that day, thank you very much. It's pretty rare that solutions work first go at my house. Speaking of distractions, once I got the last piece of Lego locked into place, I had an unannounced visit from a noisy tui. So apparently I'm a birder now. At least it was pretty. The last piece of the puzzle was oddly to stop the beam from lifting out, so that needed a metal strap on one side and an L bracket on the other. These engineering types think of everything. I recessed out a channel for the strap to sit in. That was to make sure the plasterboard would sit flush. Something to do with making it look pretty. Like I said, not my strong suit. I'm more of a lift the heavy thing sort of guy. That then went through into the ceiling and got nailed off against the giant beam. And I plumb forgot to record the bracket on the other side. And finally it was time to remove that wall and deal with the gaping void in my ceiling. Because as proud as I am to stare at it, it's bloody cold inside. So after squaring up the edges, again without covering any furniture, I proceeded to use far too much glue to fasten my replacement drywall. I may get screw popping later, but it ain't going anywhere. And yes, that caulking gun attachment has a sippy cup lid attached to it. That little hack works surprisingly well. I'm going to be building out a full TV wall later, so for now only this side is going to be covered with plasterboard. Trouble is, it's going to have to look neat and tidy, which means none of my usual bodgery is going to work here. But at least now it'll be a little bit warmer, assuming I don't put any other holes in my walls, which to be honest isn't necessarily a sure thing. So with the plasterboard up, I spent a wee bit of time rerouting all the cables in my roof. It had gotten rather messy messy with all the wood changes, and because I would always know how messy it was, I dragged my ass up into the roof and put my IT skills to use. Cable management has multiple perks. Not least of all is that it soothes my obsessive compulsions. Somehow the foreman managed to find his way into the roof. He had a field day up there. Took me ages to coax him down though. Something about inspecting my dodgy work? I don't know, I wasn't really paying that much attention to be honest. But with the glue now dry, I could finally remove most of these screws. Okay, I might have gone a little overboard. Let's just call it being thorough.
Ready for plaster.
Oh, do we have to? I usually end up with more plaster on my hands than on the wall, so with no other jobs to distract myself with, I started on my least favourite job, the plastering. I found some metal corners down at the hardware store. You essentially set them in with the plaster, and they prevent most damage when the corner's knocked. So I'll be putting one of those in the corner and paper tape on the other two joints. Or at least in theory that's what I'll do, though in reality I'll probably need a dozen coats. I kept getting bubbling in behind the paper tape, so this time I tried pre-wetting, and although it was a bit more admin, it did significantly reduce the bubbling. Although I've heard that mesh tape gets rid of that problem altogether. So with the plastering nearly complete, I think it's time to go and grab a beer. Or 6. And with a total number of ferry visits of only 4, I think I might owe her some bribe money. The next stage for this room is to close off the old hallway and then convert the space into a computer nook. I'm going to be trying my hand at cabinet making for that one, and let's just say the fuck up ferry has a field day. The room next to this one is my kitchen, and I spent over a year gutting it back to framing and building my ultimate kitchen. You can catch that video here. In the meantime, I'm off to crack open that beer, and I'll see you on the next one.